How long are your church services? So our church services usually started at 9 o'clock in the morning in my community, and on average they lasted until 12:30. So you had a leading hymn once everybody was seated. Your leading hymn about the third line, the preachers would get up and file up off to a little room or a separate room somewhere, and they'd decide whose turn it was to preach, what the sermon was going to be. They'd, talk about all those topics. And if somebody was being shunned or if there were baptism classes, they would come and visit the elders in that room and take counsel from them. And the morning before marriage, they did the same thing with the bride and groom. And then we would sing der Loblied for the second hymn and a third hymn, usually a fourth hymn, before the preachers finished their meeting and filed down. It usually seemed like it always took about an hour or so. Sometimes the preachers would get back down to help sing before they stood up to preach. If we were in the middle of a hymn, when they showed up, they would join in with the singing. After we finished the first hymn, or the last verse of the hymn we were singing, the preacher would stand up, preach the opening sermon. And he usually preached for 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how fast he could preach. And then everybody would kneel down and pray. Then we'd stand back up. The deacon usually would read scriptures then. And if you had to go outside and relieve yourself or something like that, that's when you did it normally, when everybody was standing up for the reading of the scriptures. And then after he got done with that, he would sit back down, and then the preacher that was preaching the closing sermon would stand up, and he'd preach for a long time, usually hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on, again, how fast the words would come out. And sometimes it was around 12, but that was always a good day. Usually it was 3.5 hours. And then after church, it took about an hour to get lunch ready, so usually we'd eat around 1 or 1:30. Close to the end of the closing sermon, the preacher would sit down and ask for testimony from other elders or older men that are in the district. And then he'd stand back up and preach for a little bit, and then he'd announce a prayer, and everybody would pray. Everybody would kneel down and pray, and then we'd get back up and sing another final hymn. And this one, the preachers were always there to help sing it.